I still remember that day like it was etched into my soul. The moment when Madison, my sister, marched into the office with a kind of confidence I hadn't seen before. One that screamed, "I own this place now." And, truth be told, she did. She had just been crowned CEO of our family business, the youngest ever in its 40-year legacy, and I could see it in her eyes. That fierce, ruthless ambition that I had both feared and admired in her for years. Madison was always sharp, a strategic mind that could cut through anything, and her rise was no accident. But what I hadn't prepared myself for was how cold and unyielding she had become in pursuit of power. That day, her gaze didn't flicker with the warmth of a sister or the familiarity of family. It was icy, calculated, and utterly merciless. She walked past colleagues who nodded respectfully, past the polished mahogany desks, and stopped right in front of me, the woman who had been the backbone of the marketing department for nearly 5 years, the woman who had stood by her side during countless late nights, who had believed in our shared dream to carry forward what our parents had built. I looked up, expecting some kind of recognition or even hesitation, but instead, Madison's voice cut through the room like a sharp blade. "Skylar, you don't fit the new vision I have for this company." Those words didn't just sting. They shattered me. She fired me. Me, her own sister, the woman who had given everything, who had poured heart and soul into every campaign, every strategy, every client meeting. I could feel my world tilt, the ground beneath me cracking. But oddly, a strange grin tugged at the corner of my mouth, a dark, almost defiant grin. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Maybe it was disbelief. Maybe it was the shock. Or maybe it was the fiery spark that ignited deep inside. A spark that refused to be snuffed out by betrayal. They thought that was the end of me. That moment was supposed to break me, crush my spirit, erase me from the legacy of our family business. But they were wrong. So I laughed, not because I was weak, but because I was stronger than they knew. Madison thought that firing me would silence me, push me out of the picture, and allow her to reign unchallenged. But that laugh was my weapon, my shield, the beginning of a storm they never saw coming. The office, once familiar and warm, suddenly felt cold, alien, like a battlefield, where trust was a forgotten word. I packed my belongings, the weight of those files and pictures heavy in my arms, but my heart was heavier. The faces of co-workers flashed past, some sympathetic, some indifferent, but none offering a lifeline. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it wasn't the end. That day wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing a sister. Madison and I had grown up together, watched our parents build this business from scratch, had dreams and plans to lead it side by side. But that dream had shattered the moment she looked at me, not as family, but as an obstacle. I thought I knew her, but that cold, ruthless side was new. Or maybe it had always been there, buried under ambition and carefully hidden smiles. I felt the sting of betrayal, like fire spreading through my veins, but also the undeniable pull of something new, a fierce determination to rise from the ashes. As I walked out, I whispered a promise to myself. This isn't over. I knew I had been underestimated. Madison had made a fatal mistake. She fired not just her sister, but the woman who was about to come back stronger, smarter, and more unstoppable than ever. I thought about every late night, every marketing pitch, every moment I had devoted to this company. All those hours weren't just work. They were my legacy, and I wasn't going to let Madison erase it with a single sentence. That laughter, that defiant laugh, echoed in my mind long after I left the building. It was a battle cry, a signal that the game had changed. Madison had the title, the power, the corner office, but I had something she didn't. The fire of someone who had been wronged and wasn't afraid to fight back. As I walked away from the building, the cool wind on my face felt like a rebirth, like the world was giving me a chance to rewrite the story on my own terms. I wasn't just the sister who got fired. I was Skylar, a woman betrayed, but not broken, a woman ready to rise, to reclaim her place, to prove that power without loyalty and respect is fragile and temporary. And in that moment, beneath the sharp sting of loss, I found my greatest strength, the certainty that revenge wasn't just about hurting Madison back. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity, and my future. That day was the fall of one chapter and the rise of another, a chapter where I was no longer the victim, but the force to be reckoned with. I knew the path ahead would be brutal, full of obstacles and battles, but I was ready, because sometimes the fiercest warriors are forged in the flames of betrayal, and I was about to become unstoppable. The office door closed behind me, but my story was only beginning. The world would soon learn that Skylar was a name to watch, not for the sister who got fired, but for the woman who came back to win. Our family business wasn't just a company. It was a living, breathing testament to the blood, sweat, and endless sacrifice our parents had poured into it, brick by brick, deal by deal, for decades. It was the dream we'd all grown up with, the dream Madison and I once shared so wholeheartedly, believing we would one day run it together, not as rivals, but as sisters bound by loyalty and a shared legacy. But somewhere along the way, that dream shattered, and the sister I thought I knew transformed into a stranger, driven by a ruthless hunger for control that blinded her to everything else, including family. I remember the boardroom like it was a gladiator arena, polished wood and cold steel surrounding me as Madison stood tall, the newly minted CEO, radiating power like a queen on her throne. I wasn't just there to hear the news. I was summoned to be publicly humiliated in front of the entire board, those faces a mix of curiosity, sympathy, and silent judgment. The air was thick with tension, as Madison's voice cut through the silence like a blade, calm but merciless. "You're out, Harper. Pack your things." The words stung worse than any slap, cold and final. But the worst part was the absolute certainty in her tone, as if my years of dedication, my late nights spent crafting marketing strategies, my unwavering loyalty meant nothing to her anymore. I stood there, stunned, the room spinning, but I refused to crumble. Instead, I packed my desk with deliberate precision, folding up not just the physical papers and photos, but the fragments of a relationship I had once thought unbreakable. With every item I placed into the box, my carefully scribbled notes, the awards I'd helped the company earn, the framed pictures of our family at company events, my heart felt like it was being crushed beneath the weight of betrayal. Betrayal from family hurts the worst. It cuts deeper than any professional setback because it is personal, a severing of trust so profound it feels like a piece of your soul is ripped away. Yet, despite the shame that prickled my cheeks from the eyes watching me, despite the ache in my chest, I held my head high. They thought they had defeated me, that the fire inside me would extinguish with that cruel dismissal, but I smiled, a dark, defiant smile, the kind that promises this story is far from over. I whispered under my breath, steady and cold, "This isn't your victory, Madison. You just woke a lion." And that lion was roaring to life inside me. Walking through those halls for the last time as an employee was surreal. I could hear the muffled whispers, the awkward glances, the thinly veiled pity, and even the relief in some eyes. But none of it mattered, because I was no longer a cog in this machine that Madison was trying to control with an iron fist. No, I was becoming something else entirely, a force fueled by betrayal and fire, a woman who refused to be erased by the cold ambition of her sister. Outside, the sunlight hit me like a revelation. The cool breeze, a stark contrast to the suffocating tension inside. I breathed deeply and let the weight of the moment settle over me. But inside, a storm was gathering. I wasn't just going to fade away. Madison had underestimated one crucial thing: the depth of my resolve. I thought about all the nights I had sacrificed for this company, the weekends spent tweaking campaigns, the relentless drive to make sure our business thrived. Those years were not just experience, they were my identity, and no one could take that away. Not even Madison. I knew the road ahead would be hard. Rebuilding wouldn't be easy, especially with Madison's influence and her loyalists in the boardroom. But I was ready for the fight. I remembered how our parents had started from nothing, how they had faced betrayals, setbacks, and rivals, and yet had persevered. That legacy was mine too, and I would honor it by rising above this. The betrayal cut deep, but it ignited a fire that could never be put out. It was more than just anger or hurt. It was clarity. I could see now what Madison's vision really was: control at any cost, loyalty only to power, and no room for anyone who challenged her authority. And I was her biggest challenge. The thought fueled my hunger for justice, not just for myself, but for every person who had been crushed under the weight of ambition, like mine and Madison's parents before us. I was determined to show Madison that power without respect was fragile. I would take back what was stolen from me, piece by piece, using every ounce of strength, every skill I had honed, and every lesson learned from this betrayal. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity, proving my worth, and sending a message that family could never be sacrificed on the altar of ambition. As I walked away from the building, the echo of my footsteps was the drumbeat of a new beginning. The fire inside me grew with every step, burning away the pain and leaving behind fierce determination. Madison had made a mistake she would regret, because the sister she thought she crushed was transforming into a storm she could not weather. That day marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of a war I was ready to fight. A war not just for my place in the business, but for my soul, and I vowed to win, no matter the cost. The world was about to see what happens when a woman scorned refuses to be silenced. The lion had awoken, and its roar would shake the foundations of everything Madison had built. I wasn't just a sister fired. I was a force rising from betrayal, and my story was only just beginning. Losing my job felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me, like the very essence of who I was had been stripped away in a single, brutal moment. But as crushing as that felt, I soon realized that this loss was not the end of my story. Instead, it was the catalyst that forced me to rebuild every part of myself from the ashes of betrayal, not just professionally, but emotionally and mentally, too, because I knew deep down that if I didn't find the strength to rise, Madison's victory would be complete, and my future would be lost forever. For days after that humiliating dismissal, I sat in silence, letting the pain and shock wash over me, feeling every pang of loneliness and confusion, questioning everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and my own worth. But somewhere within that storm of emotions, a stubborn flicker refused to die, a voice whispering that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something new and powerful. I thought about the years I'd spent at the family business, the late nights perfecting marketing strategies, the sacrifices I'd made, and how all of that expertise and experience was mine, independent of any job title or office. I realized that my identity wasn't tied to Madison's approval or the walls of that company. It was something deeper, something no betrayal could take from me. So, I made a decision. I would create my own path, one forged by my own hands, where I would be in control of my destiny and prove that I was more than just a shadow of my sister's ambition. With a mixture of fear and fierce determination, I launched my own marketing consultancy, starting from scratch with nothing but my knowledge, my passion, and a heart full of fire. The first few weeks were brutal. Clients were hesitant, doors slammed shut in my face, and the weight of uncertainty threatened to crush me. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of that dark promise I whispered the day Madison fired me. You just woke a lion. Slowly, quietly, word began to spread about my new venture. People started to notice my relentless work ethic and fresh ideas, and one by one, clients began to come through my door, seeking not just my expertise, but the honesty and authenticity I brought to every project. It wasn't just business, it was a rebirth, a reclaiming of my voice and power. Meanwhile, Madison's empire, once gleaming and untouchable, started to show cracks beneath the surface. Her aggressive, cutthroat style alienated key partners and long-standing clients who had grown weary of her ruthless demands and lack of empathy. I could see it all from a distance. The subtle decline in profits, the whispered doubts in the boardroom, and behind her forced, arrogant smile, I sensed the tremors of panic she desperately tried to hide. It was as if the house she built on fear and control was beginning to crumble, and though she tried to mask it with bluster and threats, the foundations were shaking. But I stayed silent, watching and waiting with the patience of a predator, knowing that true revenge isn't about rushing in with fists raised, but about choosing the perfect moment to strike with precision. Every misstep Madison made, every ally she lost, added to the inevitability of her fall. I carefully nurtured relationships that she had burned, reaching out to former colleagues who remembered the real me, the Harper who was more than just a marketing director, the woman who had vision, heart, and unwavering resilience. I became the opposite of Madison in every way. Calm, where she was frantic. Strategic, where she was impulsive. Compassionate, where she was cold. My small consultancy blossomed into a force to be reckoned with, built not on fear, but on trust and respect. I embraced every challenge, every late night, every moment of uncertainty, knowing that each step was moving me closer to reclaiming what was stolen from me. The transformation wasn't only external, it was deeply internal. I shed the weight of bitterness and hurt and replaced it with clarity and purpose. I learned to love myself again, to trust my instincts, and to understand that true power comes not from domination, but from integrity and perseverance. In quiet moments, I reflected on the cruel irony of our shared past, how Madison had mistaken control for strength, and how I had learned that strength was rooted in resilience and authenticity. The betrayal that had once felt like a death sentence became the forge in which I remade myself stronger than ever before. Every day was a deliberate act of rebuilding, a testament to the fact that you can rise from the darkest fires, not just unscathed, but renewed and unstoppable. The lion I had promised to awaken was no longer just a threat whispered in defiance. It was a reality, roaring louder and clearer with each passing day. Madison's reign was faltering, and though she fought fiercely to hold on to her crumbling kingdom, the cracks in her empire were growing into chasms. I was no longer just a bystander, but a rising force, poised to reclaim my place, not through bitterness alone, but through unyielding strength, intelligence, and grace. This journey wasn't just about business or family. It was a profound lesson about the power of resilience, the necessity of self-belief, and the truth that no betrayal, no matter how deep, could ever extinguish the fire of a woman determined to rise. I was ready for whatever came next. The future was mine to shape, and I intended to do so with a roar that would echo far beyond the walls Madison thought she had sealed me behind. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but with every victory, every client gained, and every step forward, I was rewriting my story. The past was a shadow behind me, the future, a flame burning bright with promise. I wasn't just a woman scorned, I was a woman reborn, and nothing could stop me now. And then it happened, subtle, sudden, yet heavy, with the weight of everything I'd been silently preparing for. My phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in years, and when I answered, I recognized the voice immediately. It was Daniel Mercer, the vice president of Betrayal Labs, one of the cornerstone clients that had anchored our family business for over a decade, and he didn't waste a second on pleasantries. His tone was clipped, urgent, and tired, the kind of voice worn down by months of frustration and silent discontent. And as he explained that he and his board were growing increasingly disillusioned with Madison's leadership, her erratic communication, her refusal to collaborate, her obsession with domination over partnership, I felt a stillness settle over me, that rare moment when everything sharpens, when time slows just long enough for you to feel the exact second your fate pivots, and without letting my voice betray the storm brewing beneath my calm reply, I listened intently, my fingers already moving to open a fresh file on my laptop, because I knew, with unwavering certainty, that this was the door I had been waiting for, the one I had rebuilt myself to walk through. I didn't say much that day, except, "Let's meet." And Daniel, sounding relieved for the first time in our short conversation, agreed. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was ready. I brewed coffee, lit the faint cinnamon candle that had become my late-night ritual, and worked with the focus of a woman who knew the world was about to turn. I opened every file I had on Betrayal Labs, every campaign we'd ever pitched to them during my years at the family company. Every metric I remembered, every client need, frustration, and blind spot Madison had ignored, and I crafted a pitch that didn't just sell services. It sold safety, reliability, dignity, and loyalty, all wrapped in sharp numbers, innovative strategy, and that quiet promise only the betrayed can make, that I understood what it felt like to be let down, and I would never let it happen again. Every slide I built, every phrase I wrote, felt like another precise step toward something bigger than just winning a client. It was reclamation, redemption, and yes, revenge, but not the loud, dramatic kind. It was the kind that sat beneath the surface, steady and electric, waiting to be felt in the bones. When I walked into that boardroom 2 days later, wearing a navy blazer that used to be Madison's, a silent nod to the empire she thought she'd taken from me, I felt no fear, only clarity. The men and women seated at the table looked at me with a mix of surprise and relief, like they were seeing something familiar but reborn. And as I launched into my presentation, I didn't try to be flashy or clever. I was honest, direct, and unshakable. I told them exactly how I would handle their brand, their data, their reputation, and more than anything, I told them how I would treat them, not as revenue, but as partners, allies, humans. The silence that followed when I finished was thick, and in it, I saw something shift in their eyes. Not just agreement, but trust. Daniel didn't even wait for the rest of the board to weigh in. He extended his hand, firm and confident, and said, "We're moving our entire marketing budget to you, Skylar." That moment, that simple sentence, felt like an earthquake, not just in the world of business, but inside me. I shook his hand without letting the emotion show, but inside, my heart roared, not with pride or arrogance, but with fierce, calm justice. And as word of Virayo's departure spread, as Madison's company began to reel from the loss, not just of revenue, but of status, reputation, power, I stayed silent. I didn't post about it, didn't throw shade, didn't gloat. Revenge, I'd learned, is a quiet storm. It doesn't scream, it suffocates in silence. Madison's reaction was swift and visible. Insiders later told me her face went pale when she got the news, that she stormed out of a meeting and locked herself in her office for hours, that the confidence she'd once worn like armor was now cracking, her voice shaking in board meetings, her decisions erratic and desperate. And still, I remained the ghost at the edge of her empire, the one she thought she'd buried, now risen and walking steadily toward everything she thought she had taken from me. It wasn't over, not yet, but the strike had landed, and she knew it. She knew I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was winning, and not by playing her game, but by mastering my own. My consultancy surged with new interest. Smaller clients, mid-tier businesses, even former vendors who had walked away from Madison's firestorm of ego, all began reaching out, wanting to be part of something different, something stable, something that felt human again. I worked harder than ever, but with a lightness in my chest I hadn't felt since before the betrayal. Not because I had taken something from Madison, but because I had finally proven to myself that I never needed her throne to be a queen. Still, part of me couldn't help but wonder what Madison was thinking now. If she replayed the day she fired me, if she regretted the smirk she wore when she said I didn't fit her vision, if she realized that in trying to erase me, she had instead written her own downfall. But those thoughts were fleeting. Like smoke, I had bigger things to focus on. My growing team, the integrity of the company I was building, the lives I was impacting, and the truth that I had done it all without stooping to cruelty. The strike had been made. It was clean, calculated, and devastating. And best of all, it was just the beginning. And just when I thought the silence would be enough, the moment I had been preparing for arrived with the gravity of a storm on the horizon. The annual shareholders' meeting, the grand cathedral of power, where reputations were built or shattered. And as I stood backstage, my breath steady, my heart unfazed, I watched Madison take the podium, shoulders squared, like a soldier refusing to surrender. But even from where I stood, I could see the tremor in her hands, the flickering doubt in her eyes, the whispers already sweeping through the crowd like wildfire. Numbers were down, clients were fleeing, leadership was questioned, and yet she still clung to control like a drowning woman gripping driftwood. She tried to spin it, to lace her voice with confidence, throwing around phrases like transitional challenges and restructuring strategies. But the words fell flat against the hard truth hanging in the room like smoke. Board members shifted uncomfortably. Partners whispered behind polished hands. Investors scrolled through their phones, already checking the latest industry gossip that echoed what everyone was beginning to suspect. The empire was cracking, and the queen at its helm had no roadmap left. And then, something I never expected happened. I was called to speak, invited actually, by 3 senior board members who had reached out days earlier, saying they admired what I'd built, how I'd rebuilt myself, not through vengeance, but through vision, how I had taken the values our family business once stood for and given them a new home. They said the company needed healing, not hostility, and I was stunned because even though I had dreamed of redemption, I never expected the doors I once watched slam shut in my face to swing open on their own. But I didn't hesitate. I walked onto that stage with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who had been broken, buried, and reborn, not to gloat, not to destroy, but to say what needed to be said. I didn't start with numbers. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. My consultancy had tripled in size, while Madison's ship had taken on water with every arrogant decision. I started with legacy. I started with truth. We were raised, I said, my voice steady and full, to believe that business was more than profit margins. It was people. It was trust. It was respect. The room hushed. Eyes turned toward me. Madison froze. Behind me, her breath audibly catching. We were taught that leadership wasn't about dominance. It was about service. To your team, your mission, your values. I let that settle. I could feel Madison's fury behind me, palpable, hot, and helpless. I was fired, I said, eyes locking with hers for the first time. Not because I wasn't competent, not because I didn't deliver results. I was fired because I was a threat to a vision rooted in fear, not family. A few gasps escaped. A few heads nodded slowly. But I didn't disappear, I continued. I rebuilt. I built something where people are valued, where partnership means more than power, and where no one has to fear betrayal in their own family. The tension was thick now. The room leaned into my words like they were air. This company was founded on sacrifice, not ego, on unity, not division. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that, and we paid for it. I paused, then lowered my voice, letting it wrap around every heart in the room. Power without compassion, I said, is an empire built on sand. And I watched Madison, my sister, my betrayer, blink slowly, her mouth slightly open, her composure dissolving as the audience shifted fully toward me. For once, she had nothing to say. I ended with this. I didn't come here to reclaim a title. I came to remind us who we were and who we can still be. I was cast out as a threat, but I'm still here, stronger, wiser, and ready to build a legacy that honors our family's true values. The silence that followed was a living thing, heavy, sacred. And then it shattered into applause, thunderous and raw, not polite, not political, real, honest, earned. And I stood there, feeling the sound wash over me, not as validation, but as closure. Madison remained frozen behind me, her facade stripped, her power revealed as hollow, built on intimidation and fear, not respect. She looked at me, not with hatred, but with something deeper, sharper, realization. She knew this wasn't just about business. It was about legacy, and she had lost the right to shape it. In that moment, I didn't feel vengeance. I felt justice. I didn't feel anger. I felt peace, because the most powerful revenge isn't public humiliation. It's undeniable success. It's becoming so grounded, so radiant, that the very people who tried to bury you can't help but look up and wonder how you grew through stone. In the days that followed, Madison resigned for personal reasons. The board issued a statement thanking her for her service, but the subtext was clear. The company needed healing, and she was the wound. I was offered a seat on the advisory board, and while part of me wanted to say no, to walk away forever, I accepted. Not for pride, not for control, but because I owed it to our parents, to the dream they built with their bare hands, to ensure that it was no longer twisted into a tool of vanity and vengeance. And even now, months later, as I walk into my own office every morning, a space filled with light, laughter, and people who know that integrity isn't optional, I carry that meeting in my heart, because revenge, in its highest form, isn't about destruction. It's about elevation, about turning pain into purpose, betrayal into brilliance. I often receive emails from young women, some who were pushed out of companies by jealous coworkers, some betrayed by their own families. And they ask me how I did it, how I rose after being knocked down so hard. And I always tell them this: don't fight fire with fire. Fight it with fortitude, with grace, with excellence so undeniable it rewrites the narrative. Because the world doesn't change when we scream back. It changes when we rise so high that the noise below becomes irrelevant. I didn't destroy Madison. I didn't need to. She destroyed herself with every decision rooted in ego, not empathy. All I did was walk forward, fully, fiercely, and without apology. And in doing so, I proved something Madison never understood. True power doesn't crush people. It lifts them. And those who lift others will always rise higher than those who try to stand alone. That is my message. That is my legacy. And that is the kind of revenge the world will never forget.